Welcome to today's video where I'll be practicing loose sketching and trying to complete a painting in under 30 minutes. So let's get started. This is the reference photo that we'll be using. It's a cafe storefront that I found on Pinterest. But for today's painting, I'll just be focusing on the lower half of the photo. And as I mentioned, this is a 30-minute study. So the idea is I'm really trying to push myself to be able to become more loose with my painting and not spend so much time focusing on the details. I want to be able to get across the image in as fast as time as possible. I mean, ideally I would like to reduce it to 20 minutes per page, but I felt like 30 was a good starting point. So I'm just starting with my Micron pens that are waterproof. So this is really important because when I come to add in the watercolor paint, I don't want that black outline to be running. So I highly recommend these pens. I saw them in another artist video and I bought a pack for myself and they've just been so useful. They come in varying thicknesses and what I'm working with I think is a 0.2 to begin with. So I'm just starting off by getting the basic shapes of the storefront, and I think it's important to mention that I will be slightly simplifying what I see just because I'm trying to fit that time constraint. And also, it's not always important to paint exactly what you see. It's just an impression of what you're looking at. So it doesn't have to be 100% accurate. If you wanted that, you could take a photo. So it's just my artistic impression. I also wanted to add that for the drawing part of this video, I have slightly sped it up because I didn't want it to drag out for too long. But the overall time for the sketch itself was around 8 minutes. So this in itself is already progress for me because originally I used to start off in pencil and then be trapped in the pencil, rubbing out, trying to redo things, that sort of cycle. So by committing to pen, I'm really having to think about the lines and the markings I'm putting down and just trying to focus on the overall shapes and make sure that the spacing and perspective is as near as reality as I can make it before then going in with the paint. But this is definitely a challenge for me. It's not something that comes naturally. I tend to focus on the details and want to get everything exactly right, but for this exercise it's really not the main focus. So yeah, it was about 8 minutes total for the line sketch, which I'm really happy with. One of the reasons that I've been drawn to this style of painting and sketching is because it just allows you to be a bit more free. And as someone who, like I mentioned, gets stuck in the details often and is scared about making mistakes in my sketchbook, when you give yourself a time constraint and a challenge like this, it forces you to just break free from some of those mental barriers that we put in place on ourselves. So if you're an artist as well, someone that's looking to get into art, I would definitely recommend having a look on YouTube and seeing what kind of challenges artists are setting themselves and maybe giving them a go yourself, because if we stay doing the same types of things, creating the same type of artworks without ever stepping outside of our comfort zone and pushing ourselves, that's the best way to learn. We have to just allow ourselves to make mistakes. We have to allow ourselves to experiment, to grow, to try new things, because that's how we're going to push ourselves to become even better artists. But I really am enjoying this style, and this was a really great experiment for me and one that I'm definitely going to continue pursuing in the future. So we're coming towards the end of the ink portion of the video, and whilst it doesn't look particularly amazing at the moment, I know that once we start to add in the colour, it will really bring this page to life, and you kind of just have to trust in the process, especially with watercolour, because you're building up layers and it doesn't always look amazing from the beginning. But trust in the process and hopefully you'll come out with something that you're really proud of. So the watercolour set that I'm using today is a Winsor Newton set, and it is comprised of 16 colours, so a fairly limited palette. But with that being said, I found that it actually works in my favour, at least personally, to have a more limited number of colours available. The reason why I say that is I have another watercolour set which has probably around 30 different colours within it. However, the paintings that I created using that set and using a wider variety of colours, I just felt that it looked a bit all over the place. And I've noticed that when you repeat colours throughout a painting, it gives it a nicer finish. It works the same in a lot of things. So for example, within the home, you might have a colour palette for a particular room, so you repeat accent colours and things like that, or in your garden you might repeat certain flowers. So I think it's called visual harmony. Don't quote me on that, but for me, at least at this point in my journey, I think I'm just going to continue with this limited range of colours and see what I can create within those constraints. And then perhaps in the future, I'll extend the number of colours that I use slightly wider and see what effects that has on my work. So if you're following along at home, we're just starting with the base colours, which are going to form the backdrop to our painting, and then slowly as the layers dry, we're going to add in more layers and more accents, contrasts, shadows, things like that to bring the picture to life. Now, slightly off camera, you can see that I'm mixing in a darker shade of orange, and the way that I've done this is actually to add in a bit of green into the orange. So this is based on the colour wheel theory, that if you add the colour that's on the opposing side to the colour that you're working with, so orange and green here, you'll get a deeper shade of the lighter colour. So this is a useful technique that I've learned. You can also achieve that effect by obviously adding in black or ultramarine blue. However, they will give you a slightly different shade. At this point, I realized that the color that I'd mixed was actually a bit too dark, at least at this stage for me. So if you ever find that that's the case, you can either add in more water or go in with a cloth or paper towel just to release some of that color and brighten up the paint underneath. Something that I've learned from other artists, which has become really valuable to me, is allowing areas of white within your paintings. So these form the highlights of the painting, and this is where areas of light fall on objects or people, whatever it is you're painting. And it does give the painting a lot more depth, in my opinion. So it's definitely something to bear in mind whilst you're painting. Obviously we start from the lightest and work into the darkest colours, so it's something that you have to consider at the beginning of your painting process. So if you're working from a reference photo, it might be worth just taking a couple of minutes in the beginning just to pick out where those highlights will be, and then you can keep that in mind as you start with the painting. Something that I wanted to be vocal about that I struggle with is what I'm doing just now in the video, and that is just keeping it messy and not painting within the lines. I'm someone that is used to, well, we know from young, paint inside the lines, and I think with this technique, and at least with other artists that I've seen whose work I really admire, there is a beauty in stepping outside the lines and creating something unique and individual to yourself. It's a freeing process, and it's still one that I'm having to get used to, and part of me still wants to keep within the lines, but even the sketching in itself, keeping that loose and not particularly fixed and just a lot more open, it helps to encourage me to have that same approach with the paint. So if you're someone like me that's used to sticking inside the lines, try these sorts of experiments, and yeah, you never know, you might like it and you might surprise yourself with what you create. So hopefully by now, if you've been painting along, you'll see that your painting is starting to come to life a bit. When you start adding in those washes of colour, it really makes a huge difference. And with the painting now, I'm adding in some darker shades to add a bit of contrast, add some depth. You can see that already in the background of the building with the grey. It's slightly darker at the bottom as in the photo. So picking various points of detail from the picture, but also keeping it loose and kind of an artistic impression. It's at this point where I really start to love the painting process, where the colours are coming together, we've got the shadows starting to come in, and yeah, it's really fun for me. So now it's time to start adding in some of the darker shades to the front of the building. So I love this shade of green. However, I think now looking back as I do this voiceover, I definitely could have kept it a bit more loose. I'm starting to fall into old habits of painting within the lines. However, when I step back and look at the painting as a whole, I don't think that it hindered it too much, but definitely next time I would like to be a bit more free with the shadows in the same way that I am with the base washes. Now, one area that I was slightly unsure of how to approach, and is something that I definitely need to practice in the future, is the inside of the shop front. Now, there's a lot going on. We've got the interior lights and obviously the shadow that is created the further back you look. But I do want to keep this painting fairly simple, and like I said, I am by no means an expert in this, so I definitely left it till last because I just wasn't sure how to approach it. But there's no harm in keeping things simple. Over time, you'll naturally develop and progress, so just do what you can in the moment. So I mentioned earlier in the video that this 30-minute study was actually inspired by another artist that I'd seen doing similar on YouTube. And I just wondered if any of you viewers are doing any art challenges yourself, or you've got some pending challenges lined up or goals that you've set for yourself. I think it's a great time of year, being autumn at the time of filming, to really just get cozy indoors with your sketchbook and try out different experiments. I know I for sure will be. And I'd be really interested to hear from you guys in the comments as to what your autumn plans are for your art. I decided to go in with my Micron pen for the second time, just to go over some of the black lines to make them stand out a bit more. So there's a before and after, and I definitely think that it made a positive difference to the painting. Some of the black lines had become super faint. I think, to be honest, when I first sketched in pen, where I was slightly hesitant, I didn't actually press down as hard as I could in order to create that contrast. But I definitely think that the painting benefited from this, and now I'm just adding some finishing touches to the painting. So here is the final outcome of that 30-minute study, and I'm really happy. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe.